In the early days, Australia's economy was said to ride on the sheep's back, and the ubiquitous shearer was the one who did the exhausting work, of course, to harvest all that wool.
Now, author Evan McHugh has looked at the true impact of the shearer on our economy and our folklore. His book is The Shearers, the Story of Australia told from the woolsheds, and he joins me now from Sydney. Evan, good morning.
Good morning, Michael.
Why the interest in shearers and the shearing industry?
Well, I think the story of shearers, it spans virtually the entire history of European settlement in Australia, from the days of the First Fleet all the way through to the great strikes of the 1890s, the strikes during the wool boom of the 1950s, the White Comb dispute, and then through to today, where you've got things like robot shearing and chemical shearing. It's quite an extraordinary sweep of story there. And it extends from one side of the country to the other, literally from northwest of Western Australia across to Queensland, all the way down into Tasmania. So you've got a huge sort of story of impact right throughout our history and right across the country. And of course, it's peppered with extraordinary characters and cracking yarns of their exploits. And of course, a lot of the experience with shearers has been that they've had an amazingly good sense of humour as well.
That's right, and the first image most Australians would get when you mention the word shearer is a hard-working, physically strong bloke, and they are and were mainly blokes, doing enormously hard work. Back in the early days, it was a tough graft, wasn't it, Evan, to be a shearer?
The effort involved is quite extraordinary. An average shearer on an average day will burn 3 times the calories or 3 times the energy of an average person. And the top shearers, the gun shearers, will actually, they'll burn as much energy as a cyclist in the Tour de France, except these guys are doing it every single working day of their lives, which is extraordinary. And one of the things that astounds me is that they actually will sweat out 36 litres of water in a day, of fluid in a day. And considering there's 40 litres of fluid in the average human body, if they're not rehydrating, they are actually in danger of killing themselves literally every day if they're not careful with the amount of energy and the amount of sweat that they pour out while they're doing their job.
So it would have been an occupational health and safety nightmare back in the day, Evan.
Well, when you add the fact that a lot of the wool sheds that they work in are made out of tin, and they're shearing in summer, so it just adds to the sort of suffering. And a mate who was a shearer told me that he reckoned it hurt while you were doing it, and it hurt when you stopped. So and it hurt for a long time after. So it really is one of the toughest jobs that you can possibly do on the planet, I think.
Yeah, you had to be really fit and still need to be fit to be a shearer. Now, of course, it's a bit of a history lesson as well. You talk about the bitter 1890s shearers' strike, which was very important in Australia's industrial history, but also our political history, Evan, in that it was one of the bases of the formation of the Australian Labor Party.
Well, it was the bitterness of that strike and the battle that went on. It was one of the first instances where groups of workers started to unite and form a group to collectively bargain. They were met, though, also by a group of pastoralists who also united and collectively bargained against or worked to sort of thwart the plans of the unions. Out of that, in the defeat of the first strike in the 1890s, the message that was sent out to all of those workers was vote for Labor candidates. There was not necessarily a Labor Party as such, but they started to actually say, look, go out there and identify Labor candidates and vote for those. The other thing that's not so much noticed, it's always those strikes were associated with the establishment of the Labor Party. There were also calls at the same time amongst the pastoralists to actually start a country party, a party to represent country interests. And so if you want to trace back the origins of the National Party, for example, you can go back to those strikes as well, and the tension that was existing between worker and employee on the rural scene.
Back in 1983, there were 30,000 shearers. Today, there were fewer than 3,000. Is there a real problem with the shortage of shearers?
Well, it's curious because they sort of say that there's not a shortage of shearers at the moment, and then other people will say, well, you go and try and find some to shear your sheep. One thing that was said to me a number of times as I was researching the book is basically we'd be stuffed if we didn't have the New Zealand shearers, which 30 years ago they were vilified and we didn't want them here because they were bringing their wide combs in and they were regarded as an outside menace. Now it's generally felt that if it wasn't for New Zealand shearers coming across on a regular basis, then we would actually struggle to get all of those sheep shorn. one of the other things that happens is that a lot of shearers from Europe, America, South Africa come to Australia to shear because they regard this as the place where, you know, we've got some of the toughest sheep in the world, and it's a place where you can actually come and prove yourself as a shearer. And you know, if you can cut it here with the best, then you are one of the best in the world. And of course now shearers, it's very much an internationalised activity in terms of, say, wool shearing competitions. That it's basically, there are people talking about turning it into an Olympic event because it's gaining a great amount of following among shearers all around the world, and some of the shearers that are coming, they're coming from Ireland, they're coming from England, they're coming from all over the place, and they're not sort of, you know, beer-bellied, you know, shear a few sheep and then go to the pub. These guys are super athletes. They're big, they're strong, they're you know, they're fit young men who can absolutely go flat out and very impressive in the way that they actually shear.